Alright, so as you can see, we're continuing with the original versus remake. I'm kind of surprised this is something that didn't come up in the last year when we were doing all these. But I think one thing that kind of comes to mind first when you think of comparing these as an original versus remake is the fact that we're already kind of starting in a certain place with this being, yeah, like there was like in the late 70s and then into the 80s, it was basically like this rip-off era in horror where we had like all the Jaws rip-offs and the Alien rip-offs. There was a lot of like Omen rip-offs, weirdly enough. And this falls into that category, which is really interesting because of all of those, I feel like this is the one kind of towards the top where like as far as making like taking on a life of its own and like kind of setting up its own sort of reputation and its own sort of popularity. I think it helps that I think Spielberg himself did call this like the best of the Jaws ripoffs. And it's worth noting, by the way, totally coincidentally, even though you're seeing this at like the end of October, as I'm filming this right now, it's the end of June. So it was actually just completely coincidentally. I didn't even think about it. The Jaws anniversary was just like over the weekend, so this is all kind of perfectly timed as far as me coming back to these. So just sort of being in that mood, it feels like kind of the perfect time also to talk about these. Like I said, even though this won't be out there until October, but yeah, but talking about seeing the original Piranha as this sort of Jaws ripoff, it also kind of clearly, especially as we would come to know Joe Dante's career as it went further, that this definitely has some sort of tongue-in-cheek thing going on, clearly. Like this was Dante's first movie solo. He did have a co-director on Hollywood Boulevard before this, and then as it went on, it's clear that he has a love for the genre, but also has this very sort of the tongue-in-cheek thing approaching it, where there's definitely going to be comedy in it and maybe a little parody and just all of that, where it's like love for it, but also sort of pointing out maybe some of the more ridiculous aspects, but in a kind of smaller, more clever way than, say, like, you know, the parodies movies that would break out shortly after this. Not that those don't also have their merits, but you get the difference. So it's also interesting to look at the credits for the original Piranha when you think about that also, because you've got, obviously, Corman's name all over it, of course, who was the starting point for so many people, from, you know, Dante to Cameron and actors aplenty also. Demi, I think, was in there. And then we have John Sayles writing. I don't know how much crossover there is with, like, people who are fans of Piranha and people who would know John Sayles' movies. But they're not in this territory. He's more, like, in the sort of the taking the deep looks into like the small town places and stuff like that in various different forms, and it's so make of that what you will. And then of course Dante directing. It's a very interesting background on this, and it's like when you look at it from that perspective, in retrospect, it's like it does make sense that despite what it was at its time, that it did eventually kind of take on its own life. But so, talking about that, the fact that it is this sort of parody, tongue-in-cheek thing in regards to movies like Jaws and then the rip-offs coming out around it, that it's basically already in this place, so the idea of remaking something that's already in this sort of parody territory seems really like an interesting idea. It's like, how exactly can you pull that off, especially in regards to, like, maybe saying something about, you know, the genre and stuff like that, but it does start to make sense where it's like how these things evolve over time, especially in horror, and the way horror evolves. And it's like what you can sort of still throw in that's much more current now, or 2010 current, that kind of has that same tongue-in-cheek feel, but it's updated. Like everything that's in it is updated, and the way it's approaching it is also being updated in a way. And of course, there was also like a TV remake in like '95 or something where Mila Kunis played Susie, the daughter from the original movie. I never saw that one, so I don't even know what direction that one went in. But I don't know how many people even know it exists. But talking about these two specifically, there is just immediately, like, obviously, you know, as you can see, this cover here is already, like, like, it's just going full throttle into the Jaws thing and really showing that. And so the remake actually starts in the same place. Like, the first scene of the original movie is, like, the skinny dipping that turns deadly that we see, the opening scene of Jaws itself. So the remake decided to also open with Jaws, but in a different way, with this really, I mean, really technically, I want to call it a cameo by Richard Dreyfuss, despite the fact that he's very much credited, and it's considered very much a role, despite the fact that he's here for about 20 seconds and he's the opening kill. But of course, his name is Matt again. He's on the water again. There are deadly creatures in the sea with sharp teeth again. And he's even singing the song that he and Quentin Brody sang on the boat. So it's like they just, once again, just immediately going right into it. As far as, yeah, we know the Jaws thing, you know, it's here and it's up front, and then we're gonna go on to do whatever. Because as far as being, you know, a copy of the original movie, that's surprisingly definitely not the case. So, as far as it sort of doing its own thing, like I said, for its time, and being satirical in its own way about other things, it is an interesting way to approach. And I think another thing that helps is Alexander Aja being the director who did the very good Hills Have Eyes remake like 4 years before this. So it's like, when it came time to remake something like this and you put his name on it and you know that he's doing it, it's like, okay, that gives me some sort of confidence going into it, that there's going to be some kind of purpose for this, that you hear about remakes, and especially horror remakes, and your first thought immediately is like, what's the point of this? But with I feel like horror tends to make more sense, and you can kind of do a lot more than many might anticipate when you update horror specifically, especially something like this, which seems like a random thing to bring back. Like I said, something that's already a parody going into it, but kind of setting it up in a different way entirely right away as far as, like, structurally, like where we are and who our characters are. Because you've got, you know, the two sort of protagonists going on who are, like, figuring this out, and then they're going to come in the third act and save the day. They're both here. The eccentric doctor is here in both movies. So it's like, and there's the child in peril that is the child of the main protagonist. So there, it's like you can see everything, but then completely sort of changing the settings with the original movie being in that summer camp area, and this one being in the spring break area. So we've got similar setups, very similar setups, but two completely different sets of circumstances and impending victims going on here. Because, of course, you know, Piranha being in the late 70s, kids were basically on the menu. That it was possible to see horrible things happen to children in 70s horror movies, especially like this. As balls to the wall as the remake is, interestingly enough, that's, at least I don't remember that's a territory we go into in the remake. That's something we kind of went around, and we kind of, with the spring break setting, yeah, we have the two siblings in peril, but all of the horrible shit happens to the spring breakers that are on the scene, so, or the divers. So that's something that kind of feels like this sort of 70s area of, oh, no, kids are not safe in this movie. And putting it in that summer camp setting makes it more very much in that line. It's sort of like when we finally get to Friday the 13th 6, and there's finally kids at Camp Crystal Lake. And it's like it took 6 movies to get to that point. This one, Piranha and movies of its like at the time did not give a fuck. So there's that. So to talk about, I guess we can go into, you know, the gore factor, because that's probably the first thing you're going to think of when you think of a Piranha movie. So the thing about this is, yeah, with it being, you know, that Corman low-budget place, but also being, like, you know, of its time, they're going to kind of try to get creative as far as how to do this. And I know it wasn't exactly well received at the time. Like, even in, you know, 78, it was seen as like really sort of cheap. And like what the idea of the buzzing grinding sound that they make is, it might sound a little cheesy, sure. It sounds like a horde of bees if you just heard it isolated, but I do think they do something here with the way when we get shots of like the water just instantaneously turning red like all over. It's something that's pretty jarring when you see it, and sort of horrifying in its own way, and just the way people get sort of whittled down. And like I said, they didn't have the means that the 2010 movie does, but like I said, in this Corman era specifically, and the way they're going around it, and things are sort of have to be more implied, much like Jaws itself. How they kind of had to go around the shark not working, so there was a lot that we kind of didn't see that was just implied, and that everybody will tell you that's one of Jaws' biggest strengths. So here, Corman kind of had no choice as far as budget goes, and obviously Dante as well. So that's something that I can see it being like, it's sort of, having a laugh at Jaws' expense, but also having no choice but to also do it itself, and kind of being able to have its cake and eat it too in that regard, which in this case is totally fine. I think it works both ways. To talk about the gore in the 2010 movie is basically, it's the showcase. Like it's if you're gonna talk about the 2010 movie at all, you're probably talking about the gore and the massacre scenes specifically, if I had to guess. And I will say this, I have seen the 2010 movie twice. Because I did see it in the theater, like right when it came out. And it was maybe one of the more horrific experiences I've had in a theater, because it was 15 years ago. So I was a little more squeamish than I am now. I wasn't near, stuff like Terrifier hadn't happened yet. I hadn't seen like the Hatch series or anything like that. And just kind of being overtaken by horror in general. So I was still vulnerable to a lot of gore in a lot of ways. So take into account that, but also I was like really dumb and in love at the time, and the person I felt that way towards is the person I saw this with. And when you're that in love and that dumb about it, you're basically going to do anything that person wants. And what this person wanted was to see it in 3D, in the biggest auditorium at our theater, sitting in the front row. And of course I got the height problem too, so sitting in the front row already is a height issue for me. I'm having a mini heart attack based on that alone, let alone watching this movie in 3D in the front row when I'm still a pretty squeamish person. I'm already having a heart attack about the angle. So that was... I would think you'd understand why I didn't watch this movie again for 15 years. It was a horrifying experience. And it's like I get, like, even like when I was trying to, and by the way, people who frequent the channel may know, I've got a vomit phobia too, so we're getting that right at the camera as well. And it's like, I remember I have a very vivid memory. I have a very vivid memory of the whole movie because of this experience, but specifically, it was after Jerry O'Connell has been, like, halfway devoured, and he's laying on the boat, and, like, his whole bottom half is completely stripped of skin and muscle, and it's just, like, his bony legs there. I specifically remember kind of looking away from the screen and still seeing his bony legs like protruding out of the screen in my peripheral vision. And it's like it literally surrounded you. And I think that was intended to be the appeal of sitting that closely. No appeal to somebody like me, but needless to say, that was my first interaction with this movie, and it was like, even in that moment, like saying like, this is the worst experience I've ever had in a movie, I'm also thinking, it's really impressive. Like, yeah, all the other circumstances were what was really freaking me out, but, like, the movie itself, to be as fucking insanely disgusting as it is, is still an impressive feat. because that's its job. As a Piranha movie in 2010 that is in 3D, like, its entire job, it did everything. It checked all the boxes of everything it was supposed to be and everything it was supposed to do. So I can't fault it for that. And I do hold it in a high regard because of that, regardless of everything else. So there is that. But it's like, and I have to say, I find it very interesting that the massacre is like kind of the climax of the original movie. It's like one of the very last things to happen is the massacre. And once you've seen the 2010 movie, the massacre in the original movie seems so small by comparison, almost nearly insignificant. We'll talk more about the original movie in that regard, but as far as taking that climax, like the last moments of the original movie, and just making it a whole centerpiece to this movie, is actually a really good call. Because like I said, that's what your showcase is. Like, that's what the people are here for. So to just make it, like, right front and center here and say, this is the reason why you're here, and just put it right in the middle and make it go on and on and on and on and on. There are so many fucking people and so many fucking bodies at the end of this massacre. And like I said, if you're going to go above and beyond, that's basically the way to do it. And it gets more... Yeah, like, there's plenty of deaths that look like CGI heavy when they're being devoured and stuff like that. It's really more aftermath stuff that's just really, really fucking hideous. And genuinely hard to look at. And the fact that and a lot of it isn't just being devoured by the piranha, it's the chaos and the accidents that come from the chaos. Like, most of the really gruesome, hard to look at deaths in this movie are like a domino effect happening from the piranha, like the panic and the chaos. So we've got like the wire that cuts the woman in half. We've got the woman that gets her ponytail cut in the propeller. That's one that stuck with me. The whole 15 years in between me watching this, like most of it stuck with me, but that in particular, the ponytail cut in the propeller, that was the one that really fucked with me for over a decade, and I never was able to get it out of my head. Speaking of heads, Eli Roth's just getting completely obliterated by a boat. Once again, has nothing to do with getting devoured by piranha. And I really love that also because of how that was actually a brilliant call. To have the chaos of it and the accidents be just as much of a death factor, if not more so, than the piranha themselves. Because that's what happens when groups of people this big are in total panic and chaos. Just so many people are going to senselessly die in horrific ways, and they saw that as a tremendous opportunity for this movie, and they went all in as much as they possibly could, I would say. So, again, I have to give it credit for that. And the fact that this scene, as disgusting and hard to watch as it is just such a massive spectacle. Another amazing addition is the collapsing stage right in the middle of all this. And, yeah, so it's, you just have to give it credit for how much it goes above and beyond in that instance as well. But then also there's aftermath stuff, like the way... the instantaneous nature of it, of people are there, and then they're like half their meat husks in like seconds. Like Dina Meyer's character, when they go diving, and there's that like sort of moment there where it also really shows you the clever way the movie treats its scares, where it's like the moment where he's reaching for the eggs, and then you think that's where the scare is going to be, and then one just, like, comes and brushes by his hand, and that's the actual scare. And then that ends up with Dina Meyer getting devoured, and seeing that, and then his reaction to it. Because it's like, we don't really know the damage that's been done until we see her pulled onto the boat, and she's just fucking half gone. And that's just... It's every time, by the way, I say something about this movie is absolutely revolting and disgusting, because it's this movie, it's a compliment. I just want to make that clear. So, there's that. moving on from that, the gore angle and how that's handled, there is, like, I guess something to bring up about effects while we're on that, as far as the original movie goes, because, like I was saying, we're at the very beginning of Dante's career as a director, and we see the lab. And of course, when we see Christopher Lloyd's lab, it's probably about what you would expect it to be, more or less. I like the idea of the, I'm pretty sure it's stop motion being used, where we see different creatures kind of wandering around. It's like, this movie could have been a whole other thing, and it's like, it chooses to focus on the piranha, but it's like, just throwing in those details just feels so incredibly Dante, like I said, at the very beginning of his career, so that's something that's really exciting to see, like, right at the beginning, and the fact that he would only further go down that path in his career and make, like, some really iconic shit in that vein, and that's really exciting to go back to. And of course, you know, Kevin McCarthy's there acting basically like he picks up right where he left off at the end of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. That's also very fun, and like I said, seems very intentional. Like all of the stuff that you'll find in here, as far as like references go, or comedic bits, or in jokes, or whatever it may be, all is very deliberate on both of the directors and filmmakers' parts. So that's another thing where it's like, you can do something that starts at something that's already kind of a parody and still be able to update it later, which is great. But something that could possibly be taken a little seriously is there are some genuine moments in the original movie that don't come over to the remake, and I think that works because you can look like they both have moments that are, like, you know, have genuinely suspenseful moments that are on top of just the gore and the carnage happening. Like there's the moment in the remake when they have to do, like, the cliffhanger thing where they have to go, you know, across the rope, and there's the moment where, like, Elizabeth Shue falls in, and it's like, after our brains have been set that the second you hit the water you're basically done, there's, like, genuine suspense there, and there's just enough of the characters we've seen before that it matters when it looks like her character could possibly die in that moment. And so it manages to succeed doing that in those little tiny moments that it actually does it. The original movie does seem more sort of character focused to an extent on certain characters. There's some like Grogan and Maggie, who are supposed to be the main characters, and that's basically what happens to Elizabeth Shue and Adam Scott in this too, where it's like they're set up like they're going to be the main protagonists, and then they basically just disappear for the rest of the movie until they come back and they're like the third act heroes, and it still ends up working. But it's like Grogan and Maggie in the original movie especially feel like they're sort of stuck with all the exposition. And it's like, after we spend so much time with them at the start, it's even weirder when they kind of disappear and the sort of supporting characters and the attacks sort of take over. But this one does have an amazing cast. The original movie does. Because, like, obviously it's not a Joe Dante movie without Dick Miller, which is great. And I love like, the little bits there, like, when the ribbons won't cut. Like, just those little bits thrown in are really nice. And then we have a very infuriating Paul Bartel, who was all over this genre in a particular period of time. And he's he's, you know, known for, like, he, like, directed and started an Eating Roll. He's the director of Death Race 2000. He's showed up in stuff like Killer Party, like the very beginning of Chopping Mall. Just everywhere in this genre, you'll just kind of like, he's kind of like a Where's Waldo. You'll find him somewhere when you look. And I like kind of how there's kind of an arc with him, because, like I said, he's an infuriating character. He's basically bullying Susie, and just comes off as this really pathetic character. He's like the dartboard on the tree. And then there's just a really quick moment thrown in at the very end there where we see, like, a couple of cuts of him saving kids. And it's like, just in, like, a couple of cuts, this character has an entire arc. And I do really like that. And somebody I really, really love in this, who was a fantastic addition to this movie, is Barbara Steele. With her very, like, obviously she's known for, like, you know, the witch movies and Italian movies and stuff like that. Here, she brings, like, those unhinged eyes, and she's the other scientist working with Kevin McCarthy's character. And she has these moments that are, like, she has that line where she says some things are more important than a few people's lives, when she's talking about the importance of this experiment and the piranha and all of that. And there's just that really, there's a coldness, but there's also something so sinister. But I like the fact that we don't focus on it too much, but I think the lack of focus on it makes it even more sinister when she does appear and say something really insane, or that last look she gives the camera right before the movie ends. Like, I feel like she's really not in it much, but I love that character. And the sort of, like I said, sinister nature she brings to the movie outside of the piranha themselves in the little bits that she shows up in. It's like it gives this whole other layer of terror that's something that's kind of just implied. And I really love that going on. We've also got Keenan Wynn in here as like one of our first kills, kind of setting up like what we're gonna see when we get the kills. Like he gets whittled down and all that. And he's an actor that's really interesting because it's like he may have like one of the most eclectic filmographies ever. It's like you look at his filmography and it's just like something completely different every time. And I feel like he's always popping it up in stuff that I watch, and it's like it's always something completely different in a different genre or a different role or whatever. So I love the cast that was thrown into this movie that seems quite modest as a kill a piranha movie that's seen as a Jaws ripoff at the time. So that's something that's always going to bring, like, you know, personality to it and those extra layers to it. The remake also has an interesting cast of characters. We've got, I mentioned Adam Scott and Elizabeth Shue as our sort of protagonists, where she kind of gets to come in and kind of do the badass rescue stuff at the last minute. It makes it to where, and this is kind of just Elizabeth Shue in general, it makes you wish there was more of her, and we saw more of that throughout it. But so and Adam Scott being like the badass character that's on like the jet ski with the guns and all that, and so they do that well enough while they're here. We've also got Ving Rhames, which I kind of have a bone to pick with this because he has that great moment when he essentially sacrifices himself as he's devoured and he's, you know, taking them out with the boat propeller as much as he can before he goes down, and they decided to completely just kill that by this movie getting a shitty sequel a couple of years later and bringing him back, and it's like, oh, he has guns for legs now or some bullshit. I know Guns for Legs sounds cool, but the way he went down was probably better off. Maybe because that movie was just so shit. Like, if it was better and cooler, maybe. It would have been nice if it was like, oh, it's the Planet Terror thing, only he has two legs. He has two gun legs, that's great. But, yeah, it kind of sours that moment now that we know that sequel happened. So there's that. Jerry O'Connell is probably one of the MVPs of the cast because I think what Jerry O'Connell really needs to get credit for is when you're looking at this movie from the Spring Break angle and you maybe somebody less in the know or somebody that's not aware that, you know, it comes from satire anyway, given the original movie. But somebody might watch this movie and think, oh my god, there's so much gratuitous nudity and everything is so gratuitous and it's so over the top and it's like, it's so like, it's like an exploitation movie practically, and it's like, that's just, you know. But then what's great about Jerry O'Connell and his performance is I feel like if anybody needs help deciphering if this movie's playing itself straight or is a parody, all you need to look at is his performance and what he's doing, and he is very much telling you the tone of the movie as a whole with his performance. Like, he's basically gauging the entire intent of the movie itself when you watch him, and it's like, you watch him and it's like, that's what the movie's doing. Okay, I've got it now. And it's fantastic. I hadn't seen this in 15 years, he had several lines I still remembered this whole time. And the way he's playing like that sort of Joe Francis character, but it's like it's that line where it's like it's clearly clowning on people like Joe Francis, but it's also like he's kind of playing him exactly at the same time, and it's this beautiful sort of that's the line where that's where satire exists when that line blurs. And that's really great and really fun. And I love him in this movie. And I mentioned Christopher Lloyd. Of course, if you're going to get, an eccentric over-the-top professor, scientist, whatever, yeah, that's probably going to be your first choice. And it's one of those ones where it's like, yeah, it's a little on the nose, but look at the movie we're in. It's perfect that his casting is right on the nose. So that's another thing that's just really working in its favor. So, like I said, as far as the characters go, my biggest problem is the fact that Elizabeth Shue ended up falling into that Grogan territory from the first movie, where it's like, make her... I mean, she's also a much more interesting protagonist than Grogan is, so I would have loved more of her, but like I said, that's also probably just a love for Elizabeth Shue in general. So, another thing here is, I'll just touch on briefly, and if you want to make more Jaws comparisons, is the approach in the original movie about keeping people in the dark about what's going on. And the idea that, these people might die, but, they're also, profitable, and this is great for, the town and all that, so let's just keep it under wraps. If people die, we'll worry about that later, but right now we're worried about, the monetary gain or whatever. And obviously that's its own thing. Now, what's really interesting about the remake is the remake takes a totally different approach that makes an equal amount of sense. Now keep in mind we're talking 2010. So, the moment when Ving Rhames comes in with a megaphone and tells everybody what's going on, and announces, don't get in the water or you will die, and everybody basically says fuck him and gets in the water and continues to party like nothing was ever said or nothing ever happens. Now, mind you, that's obviously at the time probably like, it's spring breakers. Most of them are probably drunk, most of them are reckless, teenagers. They don't give a fuck what some authority figure's saying. But also, now that we've been through a little something since 2010 where it's like, hey guys, don't do that, could be deadly, and people said fuck you. And interesting. So, I'll just throw that out there. And I was talking about kind of taking more... Actually, I may have started to say this and then I got sidetracked. Where sometimes the original might take a bit more of a serious approach that doesn't come over to the remake. Where we have moments like when Kevin McCarthy saves the kid, or when Paul Bartel starts saving kids, and it's like these characters that seemed, like they didn't care, they didn't have really any empathy, and they were overcome by what their intentions were. And it seems like they're in this sort of selfish place, and then to see them do these selfless acts with McCarthy full-on sacrificing himself to save this child. And that's more or less something I feel like you can take at face value. And you'll notice that I don't think the remake has any particular sincere moment like that I can think of. Maybe when the Elizabeth Shue's oldest son comes back to save the girl before he joins them, when he throws O'Connell's body in for the distraction and then manages to save her. Then we see this selfless act, but I don't really think his character needed an arc that big the way those other characters did. So it's like, if you were to put a moment in the remake that felt as genuine as Kevin McCarthy sacrificing himself, I think it would have just seemed out of place. Because this one goes so far into, the over-the-top aspect and the satire aspect and stuff like that, and just how completely thoughtless most of these characters are, hence the massive body count when everything goes down. I kind of like that it didn't really betray its tone and try to throw in any particular sincere moment. It's just fucking insane from beginning to end. And so I love that about it too. It's just commitment to that is actually a really big asset as well. So, and there's another one in the original movie when Susie can't save Betsy and basically has to watch her die. And it's like Betsy's one of the counselors that made her feel safe and told her she didn't have to go. And she was going to help her fake an injury so she didn't have to go into the water and stuff like that. and then her having to like watch her die. It's like that's a kind of a genuine, sincere moment in this one as well. And like I said, I think it helps. It's great in this way. I'm glad that it's there, but I like the fact that I don't think the remake needed it, and it decided to just not go that route. So I appreciate that equally. So especially when you've got like the closest thing we've got to like somebody dying dramatically is Jerry O'Connell. And that moment, this is one of those moments that stuck in my head for 15 years, and it's like one of the first things I still think of when I think of Jerry O'Connell in general, is that this guy is so sleazy and so obsessed with what he does that his dying words are inexplicably wet t-shirt. That is something that will be in my head forever. For as long as I live. That's what I'll remember Jerry O'Connell for. And it's like, that's so purely this movie, and I love that it just stuck to that. So, there's also the 3D aspect of the remake as well, because that we were at a time where it was like, you know, we were post Avatar, but Avatar brought in everybody using it as a gimmick and also to jack up ticket prices. And most of the time, it just didn't fucking matter if you saw something in 3D or not. It really, there was barely a difference at all. It made things darker. There was no reason for it except to be more expensive for most movies. This one, I feel like, was one of those cases where, now mind you, my own experience aside, it is the perfect choice for this, and the way they utilized it, because of course something this tongue-in-cheek, it, you know, throwing stuff at the camera intentionally is, like, people will say like, oh my god, that's so cheesy, but yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing this movie would do, and they knew that. So, like, every time they do that, it's just, like, you embrace the cheesiness more and more. But it's also, like, it really adds to the self-awareness, the presence of the 3D and the way they utilized it. Where, when it's, like, the moment when Jerry O'Connell loses his dick, and we see it floating in the water, I still remember the sound of the crowd when the piranha ate it, and then deliberately spit it back out right into the camera. And stuff like that, where it's like they know what they're doing. I remember when it occurred to me exactly how hardcore this movie was going to go, and it's right away. The moment where we see Richard Dreyfuss get devoured, and it's like, it's intense in itself, especially with, you know, the tornado that happens. But the moment when it seems like we're lingering and we're, you know, about to get our big introductory shot or whatever, and his fucking hand pops out of the water, I remember that being like, not only this big 3D moment, but this, oh my god, this is the movie. Here we go. And it's like, it's so stripped down, and it's like half waving a little bit, and it's like, that's one of those moments where it's like, got it. I knew I was in danger, given my personal experience seeing the movie for the first time, but in retrospect, I can say that it's perfectly utilized. So, that might be about all I can say. There is a lot more to say about the remake than there is the original. Like I said, the original is a pretty modest movie. I guess the only thing I didn't mention, I kind of mentioned the gratuitous nudity in sort of passing. It is interesting to me that the only case of nudity in the original movie is the opening scene that I can think of. And this one is just completely full of it. And by the time we get to the underwater ballet, you can tell, you know exactly what it's doing. And you know that it knows exactly what it's doing. And so, like I said, the fact that it just embraces everything that kind of goes in that exploitation angle, and then just amplifies it as much as it can to the point that it's laughing alongside us, is something that is clearly, like I said, and I think also, like, it's, as far as it approaching this material, I do think it's also, yeah, it's more blatant as a satire and a sort of parody and stuff like that, but and I said, there actually are genuine moments in the original movie, but as far as just like really just going head first into what it is and giving you that particular experience, I think this is one of those rare cases where if you say the title Piranha, I tend to think more people. It might depend on age, but I would say, as far as being memorable goes, people were probably more likely to remember the remake before they remember this one if you just said the title Piranha. So if you have seen both, I would imagine this would be where your brain gravitates towards first, for better or worse. So that's, I think, how I feel about these. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this at this. Um, I think we're at a point now where we're going to go into a franchise. If we're not doing that right after this, it's very, very close to this. So usually, annually in October, we'll talk about at least one franchise, and that's what we're going to go into at the end of the month here. So that's what we're going into next. So until then, I think that's it.